I spent years working beside the same woman, convinced she was just part of my routine. It wasn't until the weekends went silent that I realized how much I missed her presence. One unexpected moment forced me to question everything I thought I knew about my life. What began as habit slowly turned into something I could no longer ignore. My name is Max. I'm 36 years old. I work as a programmer in a mid-sized office, writing code most people never notice but depend on every day. I live alone in a small apartment not far from the city center. Nothing fancy, just clean, quiet, and predictable. For years, my life has followed the same rhythm. Work during the week, silence on weekends. I used to think that was normal. Lately, it feels heavy. I've been with the same company for almost 8 years. Long enough to know everyone's habits, moods, and routines. Long enough to stop expecting surprises. My days start with coffee, emails, meetings, lines of code, and end with me shutting down my computer and going home to an apartment that never changes. Olivia works in our office too. She's 32. She's the accountant. We've worked together for as long as I can remember. She sits 2 rows away from me. We talk almost every day, mostly about work. Sometimes about small things, deadlines, schedules, office gossip that never really matters. For years, she was just my coworker. That's how I thought about her. Nothing more. We never flirted. Never crossed any lines. We never even talked about relationships. Looking back, it's strange how natural that felt. As if both of us had silently agreed that work was our entire world. I knew her routine as well as my own. She always arrived 10 minutes early. She always drank tea, never coffee. She always stayed late at the end of the month. She listened more than she spoke. She remembered details about projects long after everyone else forgot them. I don't remember a time when Olivia wasn't part of my workdays. Outside the office, my life was empty but quiet. I didn't date. Not because I had decided not to, but because it never happened. After work, I was usually too tired to care. On weekends, I slept late, cleaned the apartment, went grocery shopping, and waited for Monday. At first, that routine felt safe. Later, it started to feel like I was standing still while time moved on without me. At the office, everything made sense. Tasks had solutions. Problems could be fixed. Deadlines gave structure to my days. Outside of work, there was nothing pulling me forward. Monday mornings were the only time I felt fully awake. One evening, after another long day, I stayed late to finish a project. Most people had already left. The office felt different when it was quiet. No phones ringing. No keyboards clicking. Just the soft hum of computers and the city outside the windows. Olivia was still there. She didn't say much. Just looked up from her screen and asked if I needed anything before she logged off. I said no. She smiled politely and packed her bag. "See you tomorrow, Max," she said. "See you," I replied. That moment should have meant nothing. But after she left, the office felt empty in a way I hadn't noticed before. The next few days passed as usual. Meetings, deadlines, small conversations near the coffee machine. Everything normal. Too normal. On Friday evening, I left the office earlier than usual. For once, there was no unfinished task keeping me there. I went home, ate dinner, turned on the TV, and sat on the couch without really watching anything. That was when it hit me. The quiet wasn't peaceful. It was loud. I checked my phone. No messages. No missed calls. I realized I hadn't spoken to Olivia since we said goodbye at work. That shouldn't have mattered. We were coworkers. That was it. But the thought stayed with me. Saturday morning felt longer than usual. I went through my routine, but it felt empty. I caught myself thinking about work, not because I wanted to work, but because that was where Olivia was. That thought surprised me enough to stop what I was doing. I told myself it was just habit. 8 years of seeing the same person almost every day. Of course, her absence felt strange. Still, something felt off. By Sunday evening, I was waiting for Monday in a way I never had before. Not for the job, not for the tasks, for the familiar presence that made the days feel lighter without me realizing it. When Monday came, Olivia walked into the office like she always did. Same calm expression, same quiet focus. "Good morning," she said. "Morning," I answered. Nothing changed on the surface, but something had shifted inside me. As the day went on, I noticed things I had never paid attention to before. How she paused to think before answering questions. How she stayed late without complaining. How naturally she fit into my days. For years, work had been my whole life. And for years, Olivia had been there too. Always present. Always steady. Always close, without ever stepping outside the boundaries we never questioned. That evening, as I shut down my computer, I realized something uncomfortable. I didn't just miss work on my days off. I missed her. The thought scared me because it didn't come with excitement or rush. It came with clarity, with the quiet understanding that something important had been there all along, hidden inside routine. For the first time in years, I left the office not thinking about code, deadlines, or tasks. I left thinking about what my life had become and how much of it revolved around one person I had never allowed myself to see differently. The routine was still there, but it no longer felt meaningless. Monday passed quietly, but the thought from Friday didn't leave me. I tried to focus on work, on lines of code and unresolved tickets, but my attention kept drifting. Every time Olivia stood up from her desk or walked past mine, I noticed it in a way I never had before. Nothing about her behavior had changed. She was the same as always. Calm, focused, polite. That made everything more confusing. We talked during the day, but only about work. Budgets, deadlines, small issues that needed quick decisions. I answered her questions, she answered mine. From the outside, we looked exactly the same as we had for years. Inside, I felt unsettled. By the time Friday came again, I was exhausted. Not from work, but from pretending that nothing had shifted. When the workday ended, Olivia packed her bag and wished me a good weekend. Her voice was neutral, friendly, familiar. You too, I said. I watched her leave, and the office seemed to empty faster than usual. That evening, I went home and tried to distract myself. I cooked dinner, cleaned the kitchen, opened my laptop, then closed it again. Everything felt unnecessary. Time moved slowly, as if the weekend had already stretched too far ahead of me. Saturday morning was quiet. Too quiet. I woke up later than usual and lay in bed longer than I needed to. Normally, weekends blurred together. This time, every hour felt separate. I made coffee and sat at the table, staring at my phone without checking anything. I didn't message anyone. There was no one to message. At some point, I realized I was thinking about Olivia again. About whether she slept late too. About what she did on weekends. About whether her apartment was as quiet as mine. The thought made me uncomfortable. We had never talked about our lives outside work. It wasn't intentional. It just never came up. Our connection existed entirely within office walls. I tried to push the thoughts away. I went for a walk, stopped at a grocery store, did everything I usually did. None of it helped. The emptiness followed me. By Sunday afternoon, the feeling had settled into something heavier. I wasn't sad. I wasn't anxious. I just felt disconnected, like I was missing something I couldn't name. I sat on the couch and turned on the TV, then muted it. The apartment felt smaller than usual. I picked up my phone again and unlocked it without thinking. Olivia's name wasn't there. No messages. No missed calls. Of course not. We didn't talk outside work. That had always been normal. But now it felt wrong. I put the phone down, stood up, then sat back down. The silence pressed against me. For the first time in years, I felt the weight of my weekends clearly. They weren't rest. They were waiting. Waiting for Monday. That realization scared me more than I wanted to admit. When Monday morning came, I arrived at the office early. Too early. The building was almost empty. I turned on my computer and pretended to read emails while listening for footsteps behind me. When Olivia arrived, she greeted me the same way she always did. No hesitation. No change. How was your weekend? She asked casually as she sat down. The question caught me off guard. She had never asked that before. Or maybe she had, and I just never noticed. It was fine, I said. Quiet. She nodded. Mine too. That was it. The conversation ended there. But the words stayed with me longer than they should have. Quiet. The rest of the day passed in fragments. I noticed how often our schedules aligned. How naturally we worked together. How comfortable the silence between us was. At lunch, we sat at the same table like always. Other coworkers came and went. Conversations drifted around us. Olivia listened, smiled politely, added a comment when needed. I realized that she rarely talked about herself. And neither did I. That afternoon, she stopped by my desk with a folder. I'll need your input on this later, she said. Sure, I replied. She hesitated for a second, then asked, Are you staying late today? I think so, I said. You? Probably. It wasn't a big moment. It shouldn't have mattered. But something about knowing she'd still be there made the day feel lighter. We both stayed late. Not intentionally. Just following the same patterns we always had. When the office emptied, The quiet returned, but this time it didn't feel as heavy. We worked in silence for a while. At some point, Olivia looked up and stretched. I didn't realize how tired I was, she said. Long month, I replied. She smiled. It always is. There was a pause. A natural one. No pressure. Do you ever feel like work is the only place where time moves normally? She asked suddenly. The question surprised me. I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw something familiar in her expression. Yeah, I said after a moment. I do. She nodded slowly, as if that answer confirmed something she already knew. After that, we didn't talk much more. We finished our work, packed our bags, and left together. Outside, we said goodbye and went in opposite directions. On the way home, her question stayed with me. Work was where time moved normally. Everywhere else, it stretched and slowed and lost its shape. That night, lying in bed, I admitted something to myself I had avoided all weekend. I didn't just miss the routine. I missed the person who shared it with me. And for the first time, I wondered if she felt the same silence when she wasn't at work. The week moved forward, but nothing felt the same. The days blurred together, yet every small moment at the office felt sharper. I noticed when Olivia arrived, when she left, when she paused at my desk to ask something she already knew the answer to. I noticed myself waiting for those moments. We still didn't talk about anything personal. Not really. But there was a quiet awareness between us now, like something unspoken had settled into the space we shared. By Friday, I was exhausted in a different way. The kind that comes from holding something in without knowing what to do with it. That evening, the office emptied faster than usual. People were eager to start their weekend. I stayed behind, staring at my screen long after I had finished my work. I told myself I was double-checking things. In reality, I didn't want to go home. Olivia was already gone. When I finally left, the city felt distant. Lights passed by my window as I drove home, but none of it registered. My apartment greeted me with the same quiet it always did. I dropped my keys on the table, took off my jacket, and stood there longer than necessary. I didn't turn on the lights right away. The silence felt heavier than before. Not empty. Pressing. I sat on the couch and picked up my phone without thinking. I unlocked it, scrolled, then stopped. Olivia's name was there, like it had always been. We had each other's numbers for work. Nothing unusual about that. I stared at the screen longer than I should have. Calling her felt like crossing a line that had existed for years without being named. We had never talked outside work. Not once. Not a message. Not a call. The boundary had always been there, solid and unquestioned. Until now. I told myself I just wanted to check on something work-related. That was a lie. There was nothing urgent. Nothing that couldn't wait until Monday. My thumb hovered over her name. I thought about how quiet my weekends felt. About her question earlier in the week. About the way she said that time moved normally at work. About how familiar that feeling was. Before I could overthink it any further, I pressed call. The ringing felt loud in my ears. Once. Twice. I almost hung up. Then she answered. Max. Her voice sounded surprised, but not uncomfortable. Hey, I said. I hope I'm not calling too late. No, she replied quickly. It's fine. I was just at home. There was a pause. Not awkward. Careful. I didn't mean to interrupt your weekend, I added. You didn't, she said. Actually, I was glad to hear from you. Her words settled into me slowly. I started then stopped. I realized we never talk outside work. She let out a quiet breath. I noticed that too. Another pause. Longer this time. So, she said softly, how's your evening? I leaned back on the couch, staring at the ceiling. Quiet, I admitted. Too quiet. She was silent for a moment. Then she said, mine is too. That was enough to open something neither of us had planned to open. We talked without rushing. About small things at first. How the office felt emptier on Fridays. How the weeks blended together. How weekends didn't feel like rest anymore. At some point, the conversation shifted. I don't think I ever told you this, Olivia said. But I've never really had anyone outside work. I swallowed. Me neither. The words felt heavier out loud. I always thought it would just happen, she continued. That one day my life would look different. But it never did. I kept waiting too, I said. For something to change. And it didn't, she replied. We both understood what that meant. Years passing quietly. Days filled with work because it was easier than facing the emptiness outside of it. I think, she said carefully, work became our excuse. An easy one, I agreed. The conversation stretched on. We talked about how safe the office felt, how predictable, how being there together made the days easier, even when we never acknowledged it. At some point, I checked the time and realized hours had passed. "Olivia," I said, my voice lower than before. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course. Do you ever feel lonely on weekends?" She didn't answer right away. "Yes," she said finally. "More than I want to admit." Something tightened in my chest. "I feel that too," I said. "All the time." The line went quiet again, but this silence felt different. It felt full. "I didn't expect this call tonight," she said. "But I'm glad you made it." "So am I," I replied. When the call ended, I sat there for a long moment, phone still in my hand. The apartment felt different now. Less empty, less heavy, but something inside me had shifted completely. I stood up, walked to the window, and looked out at the street below. Cars passed. People moved on with their lives. For the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of urgency. I didn't want to wait anymore. I picked up my keys, grabbed my jacket, and headed for the door. I didn't overthink it. If I did, I knew I would stop myself. Some decisions don't come from logic. They come from clarity. I got into my car and started driving. The city felt quieter at night. Streetlights reflected off the windshield as I followed familiar roads toward her neighborhood. My hands were steady on the wheel, but my thoughts were loud. What was I doing? The answer was simple. I was going to see her. When I parked outside her building, I sat in the car for a moment, breathing slowly. I texted her before I could lose my nerve. "I'm outside, if that's okay." The reply came almost immediately. "Okay." I walked up to her door and knocked. When she opened it, there was no shock on her face. No confusion, just recognition. "Hi," she said. "Hi," I replied. For a moment, we just stood there. No rush, no drama. Years of shared silence hanging between us. "I'm glad you came," she said quietly. "So am I answered. That night, we didn't pretend anymore. And neither of us wanted to go back to waiting. We didn't rush into anything that night. When I stepped inside Olivia's apartment, it felt quiet in the same way mine did, but warmer somehow. Lived in. There were books on the shelves, neatly stacked papers on the table, a jacket hanging over the back of a chair. Small details that told a story I had never seen before. She closed the door behind me and leaned against it for a moment, as if grounding herself. "I didn't expect you to drive over," she said calmly. "I didn't expect to either," I answered. But once we hung up, staying home felt impossible. She nodded, like that made perfect sense. We moved into the living room and sat down, leaving a careful distance between us. Not because it was uncomfortable, but because neither of us wanted to pretend this was something casual. The weight of years sat between us, and we both knew it. "I keep thinking about how long we've known each other," Olivia said, "and how little we actually talked about real things." "I think we were afraid," I replied. "Not of each other. Of what would happen if we stopped hiding behind work." She looked at me then, really looked at me, like she was seeing me outside the office for the first time. "I didn't realize how much of my life I tied to that building," she said. "Until tonight." We talked for hours, not about big dreams or dramatic moments, but about the quiet truths we had never said out loud. How weekends felt endless. How work filled the space because it was easier than asking why nothing else had. She told me about evenings spent rereading the same pages of a book without absorbing the words. I told her about sitting in my apartment with the TV on just to hear another voice. There was no judgment in any of it, just recognition. "At some point," she said softly, "I stopped expecting my life to change." "So did I admitted. "I think that's when we stopped noticing each other." She smiled faintly. Or maybe we noticed too much and didn't know what to do with it. The thought stayed with me. When the night grew later, neither of us mentioned the time. There was no urgency to leave. No sense that this moment needed to end quickly. Eventually, Olivia stood up and walked to the kitchen. "Do you want some tea?" she asked. "Yeah," I said. "I'd like that." She moved comfortably around her space, like she had done it 1,000 times before. I watched her without overthinking it, noticing how natural it felt to be there. When she handed me the cup, our fingers brushed briefly. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't need to be. The connection had already been there for years. We sat again, closer this time. "I don't want this to be something we regret tomorrow," she said quietly. "Neither do I replied. "That's why I came. Not to escape something. To face it." She considered that, then nodded. "I don't want to go back to pretending," she said. "I don't think I can. I don't want to either." That was the moment something settled between us. Not excitement. Not fear. Certainty. When I stayed the night, it wasn't planned. There was no discussion about it. It just happened naturally, like the next step in a conversation that had been going on for years. The morning light came in softly through the curtains. For a moment, I forgot where I was. Then I remembered, and instead of panic, I felt calm. Olivia was already awake, sitting at the edge of the bed with a cup of tea in her hands. "Good morning," she said. "Morning," I replied. There was no awkwardness. No need to explain anything. We both knew what this was and what it wasn't. We spent the morning quietly. No rush. No plans. Just being present in the same space. It felt unfamiliar and familiar at the same time. At some point, she asked, "Do you think this changes everything at work?" "It changes how we see things," I said. "But I don't think it breaks anything. We've already built something solid there." She thought about it. "I don't want to hide again." "Then we won't," I said. "We don't have to announce anything. But we don't have to pretend either." That simplicity felt right. Later that day, when I went back to my apartment to grab a few things, it felt strangely distant. Like a place I had outgrown without realizing it. I returned to Olivia's place that evening without hesitation. "We don't have to decide everything right now," she said as we sat together. "But I don't want this to be temporary." "Neither do I," I replied. "I don't want to go back to separate lives when we've already been sharing one for years without admitting it." She looked relieved when I said that. "So," she said, "what are we doing?" I didn't overthink it. "We keep going. Together. And we see where it leads." She smiled, genuine and unguarded. That night, lying next to her, I realized how much energy I had spent maintaining a life that felt empty, and how little effort it took to choose something real. By morning, the decision felt clear. I wasn't visiting anymore. I was staying. We didn't make any dramatic announcements. There was no moment where everything suddenly changed. Life moved forward the same way it always had, just with a different weight to it. On Monday morning, we went to work together. Not in the same car. Not holding hands in the parking lot. We arrived the way we always had, separately, carrying the same habits we had built over years. But when I saw Olivia walk into the office, something felt steady instead of distant. We exchanged a look that said enough. At work, we stayed professional. Nothing about our behavior crossed any lines. We did our jobs the same way we always had. But now, every shared task felt intentional. Every quiet moment felt grounded. After work, we went home together. That was when the real changes began. Living together wasn't romantic in the way people imagine. It was practical. Adjusting schedules. Making space. Learning each other's routines outside the office. It was deciding who made coffee in the morning and who forgot to buy milk. It was quiet evenings and early nights. It was real. There were moments of doubt. Not about each other, but about ourselves. About whether we had waited too long. About whether we were capable of building something new after years of standing still. We talked through all of it. One evening, sitting at the kitchen table, Olivia said, "I think we're doing this the opposite way people usually do." I smiled. "How so?" "We didn't fall into something exciting," she said. "We stepped into something solid." She was right. There was no rush. No fear of losing momentum. We weren't chasing anything. We were building something that had already been forming quietly for years. At work, people noticed a difference. Not in how we acted, but in how we seemed. Calmer. More present. Someone joked that we both looked rested for the first time in years. We didn't correct them. The weekends changed the most. They were no longer something to get through. They became time we shared without thinking about it. Grocery shopping. Long walks. Quiet mornings where no one felt the need to fill the silence. One Sunday afternoon, Olivia leaned against me and said, "I don't feel lonely anymore." Neither did I. Months passed, and the routines settled naturally. We didn't lose ourselves. We didn't change who we were. We simply stopped living parallel lives and started living one together. Eventually, the conversations turned toward the future. Not big speeches. Just simple questions. Do we stay here? Do we want something bigger? Do we build a family? The answers came slowly, but they came clearly. We decided to stay. To keep our jobs. To keep our stability. To build our life on the same foundation that had always supported us. Trust, patience, and consistency. There was no dramatic proposal. No grand gesture. One evening, Olivia looked at me and said, "I don't want to imagine my life without you anymore." I answered without hesitation. I already can't. That was enough. We planned our future the same way we had learned to live together. Carefully. Honestly. Without pressure. Looking back, it's clear now. She was never just my coworker. She was the person who shared my days before I understood what that meant. The person who stood beside me while we both waited for life to begin, not realizing it already had. We didn't miss our chance. We simply took it when we were finally ready.